Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about the world of sabermetrics.
Sabermetrics.
Yeah, the science behind baseball analytics.
Yeah.
And I know what you're thinking.
What am I thinking?
You're thinking that it's just a bunch of numbers.
All right, a bunch of numbers.
But it's really way more than that.
Yeah.
It's like this secret decoder ring for baseball.
Mm.
Yeah. It helps reveal all these hidden truths about players and about strategies that those old traditional stats just miss,
Yeah.
So imagine being able to predict a player's future performance, or see those strategies that are hidden in the data and really understand, like why some teams, they defy all expectations and win.
Right.
So to guide our deep dive today, we're going to be using this fantastic introduction to sabermetrics.
Okay.
And hopefully it'll help you unlock some of those insights that are hidden in the world of baseball.
Yeah, it really is a different way to see the game. It's like being able to peek behind the curtain to see how these decisions are actually made,
Yeah, and so how did this whole sabermetrics thing even start?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think about the Oakland A's and their incredible 2002 season as, a turning point.
Right.
I mean, this was a team that had a really limited budget.
Yeah.
And they managed to win 20 games in a row.
20 in a row. Yeah, that's right.
It's unbelievable.
Their general manager, Billy Beane, he was really skeptical of those old traditional scouting methods.
Oh, really?
He really believed that data could, help him find those players that were undervalued and help him build a winning team, without spending a ton of money. And he actually proved it, too.
He proved it.
The A's that season, they won 103 games and tied for the best record in the American League.
Wow.
It was a huge upset, and it forced, the rest of the baseball world to kind of take notice, and it really helped popularize sabermetrics. That story was later told in the book and movie Moneyball.
Yeah, I love that story.
It's a great story.
But I have to admit, when I first heard about sabermetrics, I was a little intimidated,
Oh, yeah.
It seemed really complex.
Sure.
Like, how am I going to understand all this?
Yeah.
But as I learned more, I realized that the basic principles
Yeah.
are actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah, they are. It's not as complex as it seems.
Yeah, like what are some of those principles?
Well, one of the most important is the idea of, objectivity over subjectivity.
Okay.
So, those traditional scouting methods, they relied heavily on intuition and personal opinions.
Oh, so just like a gut feeling?
Yeah, just a gut feeling. And, those could be pretty biased.
Right, yeah. I had seen
And
that.
sabermetrics, on the other hand, it uses data, to remove that bias and evaluate players based on what they actually do on the field.
Yeah, so instead of saying like, this guy looks like he's a good hitter,
Right.
you can look at the numbers
Yeah.
and see how often they get on base and how many runs they actually score.
Exactly. Yeah, you can look at, their on-base percentage or their slugging percentage, things like that,
Okay.
and get a more objective measure of their performance.
So a pitcher's wins then.
Yep.
So that seems like a pretty important stat, right?
It seems like it would be, yeah.
But a pitcher's wins can be influenced by so many things that are outside of their control.
Yeah.
Like how well their team is playing defense or how much run support they're getting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So sabermetrics kind of digs deeper and looks at stats like FIP fielding independent pitching.
So what is that exactly?
So it basically focuses on those outcomes. A pitcher can directly control, like strikeouts and walks and home runs.
Uh-huh.
And by ignoring things like, the quality of their defense, it leads to a more accurate assessment of their pitching ability.
I see.
So, many analysts, they consider that to be a much better indicator of a pitcher's true skill than something like ERA, which can be really misleading.
Okay, so it's not just about looking at different stats, but it's also about understanding the context behind those stats.
Yeah, absolutely. Context is king in sabermetrics,
Okay.
You have to consider things like park factors,
Park factors.
For example, Coors Field in Denver is notorious for being a hitter's park. Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
Because of that high altitude.
Right.
So if you're comparing a hitter who plays in Coors Field to a hitter who plays in, a more pitcher-friendly park,
Yeah.
you have to take that into account.
You can't just compare them straight up.
Exactly. It wouldn't be a fair comparison otherwise.
It's like you can't compare apples to oranges.
Right.
You can't compare players who play in totally different environments.
Exactly. And that's just one example.
Okay.
You also have to think about the era a player played in.
Oh, yeah.
The game has changed so much over the years.
For sure.
The run-scoring environment was a lot different in the 1920s than it is today, so you can't just compare raw numbers across eras. You have to kind of make adjustments, and sabermetrics helps us do that.
So it helps level the playing field.
Yeah, level the playing field.
But isn't sabermetrics also about, like, predicting the future?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what good is it to know what a player did if we want to know what they're going to do next season? That's a great point, and you're right. One of the most powerful things about sabermetrics is its ability to actually predict future performance.
Right.
It doesn't just tell us what happened. It kind of helps us understand why it happened, which allows us to make, more informed predictions about what might happen next.
So it's not just about looking backwards. It's about looking ahead.
Exactly.
Okay, can you give me an example of how this works in practice?
Sure. One concept that sabermetricians use a lot is BABP, which stands for batting average on balls in play.
Right.
It's a way of measuring how often a hitter gets a hit when they put the ball in play.
Okay.
But here's the key.
Oh.
It helps us kind of differentiate between skill and luck.
Wait, luck? I thought baseball's all about skill.
Of course, skill is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
But even the best hitters in the world, they get lucky sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes they hit a weak ground ball that just happens to find a hole. Other times they hit a line drive right at someone.
Happens all the time.
And BABIC helps us figure out how much of a hitter's success is due to skill and how much is due to, those lucky breaks.
Okay, so if a player has a really high BABIP, but they don't hit the ball very hard, it might mean that they've been getting lucky and their batting average might go down in the future.
Exactly.
Okay.
On the other hand, if a player has a low BABIC, but they consistently hit the ball hard, it could be a sign that they're actually a better hitter than their stats suggest.
Interesting.
They've just been unlucky.
So BABIP is like a secret weapon for uncovering hidden talent.
You could say that it's one of many tools that sabermetricians use to evaluate players, and it's a great example of how sabermetrics goes beyond just looking at, surface-level stats.
Right.
It helps us understand, those underlying factors that actually drive performance.
This is so interesting. Okay, so we've talked about the importance of objectivity, context, and predicting the future.
Yeah.
What else makes sabermetrics unique?
Well, it also helps us understand a player's individual value, regardless of their team's overall success.
Well, that's interesting.
In the past, a player on a bad team might get overlooked, even if they were playing really well.
Right.
But sabermetrics can help us kind of isolate a player's true contribution, even if their team isn't winning a lot of games.
So what kind of tool can we use to actually measure that?
One of the most important metrics for this is WAR, which stands for wins above replacement.
WAR. Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's basically a way of measuring how many wins a player contributes to their team compared to, a readily available replacement level player.
Wait, a replacement level player? What is that?
Yeah, so a replacement level player is basically a hypothetical player who could be, easily acquired by a team to fill a roster spot.
Okay.
They're not a star, but they're not terrible either. They're kind of like the baseline.
Okay.
So if a player has a WAR of 5, it means they contributed roughly 5 more wins to their team than a replacement level player would have. So a high WAR means that player is really valuable no matter what their team's record is.
Okay, so WAR has become like the gold standard for measuring a player's overall value.
Pretty much.
Because it takes into account every aspect of their game.
Exactly. Hitting, fielding, base running, pitching. It gives us a single number that we can use to compare players across different positions and eras.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've covered some of the big ideas behind sabermetrics. Objectivity, context, predicting the future individual value.
Right.
Now I'm kind of curious to hear more about like the specific stats that make sabermetrics so insightful.
Okay.
So we're not going to, go through this long, boring lists of definitions.
Yeah.
But can you walk me through like some of the most important ones?
Of course. Let's start with one of the most fundamental sabermetric stats. On-base percentage, or OBP.
Okay, OBP. I've definitely heard of that one.
Yeah. It's, one of the cornerstones of sabermetrics, and the Moneyball story really helped popularize it.
Yeah.
OBP measures how often a batter reaches base, regardless of how they do it. Hits, walks, hit by pitches, it all counts.
And so it's not just about getting hits.
Exactly. Sabermetrics emphasizes that, getting on base by any means is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Think about it. The more times a batter reaches base, the more opportunities their team has to score runs.
That makes sense. So a player with a high OBP might actually be more valuable to their team than a player with a higher batting average, but who doesn't draw as many walks.
Exactly, and that's why OBP has become such an important stat for evaluating hitters. It gives us a more complete picture of their offensive contributions.
Okay.
Now, another key offensive stat is slugging percentage, or SLG.
SLG. Okay, isn't that the one about power?
You got it. Slugging percentage tells us not just how often a player gets a hit, but also, how many bases they get on those hits?
Okay.
So it gives more weight to those extra base hits, those doubles, triples, and home runs.
Because those are the hits that really drive in runs.
Yeah. Exactly. A player who hits a lot of home runs is going to have a much higher SLG than a player who mostly hits singles, even if their batting averages are similar. Think about a player like Babe Ruth.
Oh, yeah.
Who's considered one of the greatest hitters of all time.
Yeah, he was amazing.
He holds the major league record for career SLG at .690.
.690. That's unbelievable.
It is.
So we've talked about OBP, which is all about getting on base.
Right.
And SLG, which measures a player's power.
Yep.
What about the guys on the mound? Are there any sabermetric stats that can help us understand pitching performance better?
Absolutely. We already touched on FIP earlier, which focuses on those outcomes a pitcher can control.
Right.
But there are many others. For example, there's a stat called WHIP, which stands for walks plus hits per inning pitched.
So it's basically a measure of how many base runners a pitcher allows.
That's it. And a lower WHIP generally indicates a more effective pitcher because they're keeping runners off the bases, making it harder for the opposing team to score.
It seems like sabermetrics is all about finding ways to, cut through the noise and get to the heart of a player's true ability.
You're getting it. And speaking of cutting through the noise, another area where sabermetrics has made a huge impact is in evaluating defense.
Oh, really?
For a long time, defensive skill was mostly judged subjectively.
Ew.
Scouts would talk about, a player having good hands or a strong arm, but there wasn't really a reliable way to quantify it.
I could see how that would be a problem.
Yeah.
How could you compare players or track improvement if you're just relying on, people's opinions?
Exactly. Sabermetrics has changed that by developing stats like defensive runs saved or DRS.
DRS. Okay, tell me more about that.
DRS measures how many runs a player saves or costs their team compared to, an average defender at their position.
Okay.
It takes into account things like range arm strength and the ability to make those difficult plays.
So a player with a high DRS is a real asset to their team in the field.
Absolutely. DRS helps us identify the best defensive players in the league, and it gives us, a much more objective way to evaluate defensive performance.
It's amazing how sabermetrics can quantify things that used to be so hard to measure.
Yeah.
It's really changed the way we understand the game. But tell me, is this just something that statisticians and hardcore fans use, or are teams actually using sabermetrics, in a practical way?
It goes way beyond that now. It's not an exaggeration to say that sabermetrics has revolutionized the way major league teams operate.
Right.
Almost every team now has a dedicated analytics department.
Yeah.
And they use sabermetrics for everything from player evaluation to contract negotiations to in-game strategy.
So the days of just relying on scouts to make all the decisions are over.
Pretty much.
All right.
While scouts still play, an important role,
Yeah.
their insights are now supplemented by, a wealth of data.
So much data.
Teams use sabermetrics to identify those undervalued players, predict how players will perform in the future, and even make real-time decisions during games.
So can you give me an example of how teams are using sabermetrics during a game?
Sure. One of the most visible ways is through defensive shifts.
Oh, yeah.
You know how sometimes you see those infielders positioned in really unusual spots, almost like they're playing in the outfield?
Yeah. I've always wondered about that. It seems so strange.
It's not strange at all when you understand the data behind it.
Okay.
Teams use sabermetrics to track those hitters' tendencies, like where they typically hit the ball and then they position their fielders accordingly, increasing their chances of getting it out.
So they're basically playing the odds based on what the data tells them.
Exactly. It's a great example of how sabermetrics has moved beyond just analyzing the past and is now being used to make strategic decisions in real time. And the coolest part is it's not just teams who have access to this information anymore.
Oh, what do you mean?
Fans can now find a wealth of sabermetric data online.
Really?
There are websites like Fangraphs, Baseball Reference, Baseball Savant that provide incredibly detailed statistics on every player, team, and game. You can dive deep into player stats, compare different eras, even analyze those controversial calls by the umpires.
It's like having your own personal team of analysts.
Exactly.
That's amazing. So sabermetrics has clearly come a long way, but it's not just about looking at the past, right? What are some of the trends that are shaping the future of sabermetrics?
That's what makes it so exciting. This field is constantly evolving. One of the most significant developments in recent years is the emergence of StatCast.
StatCast, I've heard that name, but I'm not really sure what it is. Can you break it down for me?
Of course, StatCast is a revolutionary system that uses high-speed cameras and artificial intelligence to track everything that happens on the field.
Really everything.
The speed of every pitch, the launch angle of every batted ball, the distance a fielder runs to make a play. We're talking about a level of detail that was unimaginable just a few years ago.
Wow. It's like having a microscope on the game,
Exactly.
revealing all these hidden factors.
And the amount of data that StatCast generates is mind-boggling. Teams are still trying to figure out how to use all of this information effectively, but it's already having a huge impact on the way we understand the game.
So StatCast is all about what's happening on the field.
Mm.
Are there any other cutting-edge trends that are kind of pushing the boundaries of sabermetrics?
Another fascinating area is biomechanics.
Biomechanics now, that sounds interesting. Tell me more.
Biomechanics is basically the science of how the human body moves.
Okay.
And teams are now using it to study the mechanics of baseball players, how they swing, how they throw, how they run. They use motion capture technology to track every subtle movement.
Wow.
Which allows them to identify, areas for improvement and even design personalized training programs.
So it's not just about analyzing what players do on the field. It's about understanding how their bodies work and how to optimize their performance.
Exactly. Biomechanics has the potential to revolutionize player development and injury prevention.
Yeah, it really is incredible to think about, like, how far sabermetrics has come and where it's headed. We've gone from relying on gut feelings and subjective opinions to, having all this incredible data right at our fingertips.
It really is a true data revolution, and it's changing the game in ways that we're only beginning to understand.
So to recap, sabermetrics has given us these new ways to evaluate players, build teams, even watch the game. It's provided insights for everybody from the general managers to coaches to fans like us.
And it's important to remember that sabermetrics isn't about replacing, those traditional scouting methods or the eye test. It's about using data to supplement and enhance those things, to get like a more complete picture of the game.
That's like having all these new tools, in your toolbox. It's not about throwing away those old tools. It's about using the right tool for the right job.
That's a great analogy. And the best part is this revolution isn't just limited to baseball.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Knowing what we know now about the power of data, what other areas of life could benefit from this kind of sabermetric approach?
It's a fascinating question to consider. Where else do we rely on intuition or tradition when objective analysis might reveal hidden truths? Think about, healthcare education, even our personal finances.
Yeah. Could there be like a Moneyball approach to finding the best teachers or doctors, or a way to use data to make smarter decisions about our investments?
The possibilities are endless. It's all about challenging assumptions and looking for those hidden patterns that data can reveal. Data can help us understand the world around us in new and surprising ways. And, that knowledge can be incredibly powerful.
So to our listener, we encourage you to explore the source material we've discussed today and check out some of those amazing sabermetrics resources online.
Yeah.
Websites like Baseball Reference or Fangraphs can provide a wealth of information, and you might be surprised by what you discover.
It's a rabbit hole worth exploring. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about sabermetrics, and we hope this has sparked your curiosity to explore further.
And if you find yourself down that statistical rabbit hole and have questions, about specific sabermetric concepts or player comparisons, where to find us, we're always up for another deep dive.
Until next time, keep those analytical minds engaged.